Good afternoon, everyone. Morning is now gone. Hello and welcome to our webinar for March 2018. And today we have our guest speaker is Jason Little, and we're going to talk about how to organize people around the work or around that. Just a little bit before we start, a little bit what's going on. So a little message from Toronto Agile community introducing Jason and presentation. There will be follow-up questions, but you can also bring the questions during the presentations, and stay on until the end because there are some interesting events, and we will want to share them with you. So welcome from the Toronto Agile community team. My name is Ardita Karai. With me is Peter Jakes, and also help us run these webinars. And thank you for your time and for your efforts on this. Some housekeeping rules. In order to keep the noise down, all attendees are in listen-only mode. And any question, please use the question box. You have a visible question box. Please type there the questions and we'll follow up. If you have any technical issue, please try another browser or log in, log out. So far, we don't seem to have any technical issues, so shouldn't be on this side of the webinar. Before we go any further, a big thank you to our sponsors that support us on our events. We have the gold sponsors and the silver sponsors. They help us with our conference, with open space, and also with the webinars that we run monthly. So thank you very much for your help and support. And if you want to bring your organization into this list of these great companies, please do contact us for sponsorship opportunities. So a little bit about Jason today. I know Jason as a friend. We have worked together some years ago, and I don't know how to promote him better than what you have written there, but I really think Jason is one of the thought leaders in our community here in Toronto, and he has done a lot of work on the change management, and he's an international speaker, and the passion that he has when it comes to putting people together in for success when it comes to changes that come. I think he is one of the best people to talk to and to listen to from his experiences. So welcome, Jason.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yes. So I'm really looking forward to your experiences today that you're going to share. And without any, people don't want to listen to me more, so I'm going to make you a presenter, and the stage is yours.
Cool. So my screen's showing up okay?
Yeah, give me a second. Yes, we see your screen.
Groovy. All right. Thanks for that introduction. I hope the session works up to what you described.
I'm sure it will.
So what got me started down this path was about 10-ish years ago or so. I was working for a large organization, and I think many Scrum Masters or coaches can relate to this scenario where you get hauled into the senior manager or the director's office, and they give you the whole spiel about how we want this initiative to be successful and we don't want Agile to get in the way of it. And back then, I really had nothing other than Agile tools for that conversation. So the best I could do when they asked me, what are you going to do to make sure that Agile doesn't get in the way of delivering this very important program? I said, well, there's only 4 values. Which of the 4 do you want me to break? So it didn't really help get past that situation. And it took a number of years to realize what they're really saying was they are on the hook for delivery. So, you know, Scrum saying the team is accountable or responsible for getting things done. That's not the way it works in a lot of large organizations. There's a huge kind of ripple effect that happens outside of the team. And as much as we want our own biases towards our Agile beliefs to guide those conversations, sometimes you need a little bit more because people don't always share the same beliefs. So that got me kind of started down the path of looking into the organizational change aspect of Agile. So what I wanted to do today was to share a few stories and a few techniques that are quite deep, so I'll try to do them as much justice as I can in a short period of time. But there's a lot of references at the end of the slides, which will be posted as well if you want to check those things out in more detail. I guess in the same organization where I had that conversation, one of my first experiences was being thrown into the middle of a yelling match between a senior manager and the quote-unquote senior coach I was working with, where F-bombs and everything were being thrown around. So the senior manager was adamant that he wanted to put in some governance checklist in the Agile tool that we were using to manage the work, which was Rally back at the time, to which the senior coach did not respond well and said this was a cluster F, and there's no F in way. This is going to F and F and F and F and you know, just getting started in this line of work, I thought, oh, okay, I guess that's what coaching is. You just yell at people who think differently from you. So after that conversation ended, I was sitting in the senior manager's cube, and I just said, all right, dude, if you really want to do this, I'll put this up on the staging site, because of course, you know, being the Agile coaches, we're responsible for the tool management. And give it a shot, see how it works. If you want to use it, you know, you seem really strong on the side of wanting this thing to work this way, so give it a shot and let's see what happens. So I made the updates to the tool, never heard about the problem again. So it was just one of those conversations where it's, you know, maybe he's having a bad day, the coach is having a bad day, something in production had recently blown up, and everybody kind of overreacted. So all these stories and things that have happened over the years have really kind of got me thinking more about how can we meet organizations where they're at, challenge them to do a little bit better, and help them take little baby steps forward. So this story is, I guess, a combination of patterns that I've seen in many medium and larger organizations. There's 2 Scrum teams, there's a vendor, and there's some other teams. And these groups are all working together in some program. So they're grouped together in some initiative that they're trying to get done. So in front of the Scrum teams is a product owner. So in the one particular organization where this story is based, it's, yep, we have one product owner, we have fully dedicated team. All right, cool. So let's take a look at what else happens in this program. So tell me about what this product owner does, how they prioritize the work. Oh, well, there's really 3 others. Oh, okay, what do these 3 others do? Well, they kind of work with these other 2 people, the program manager and the senior PM, to kind of coordinate the work from all the different lines of business and all the other different projects that the Scrum team is working on. To which I said, well, I thought everyone was dedicated to this program. Well, they are, but kind of, you know, they've got some other things that they need to do sometimes. All right, no problem. So let's look a little bit deeper about how this program is structured and set up to get work done. There's another technical group. So there's one technical lead that kind of liaisons between the other 8 or 9 technical people that work on all the various different applications and systems that our Scrum teams are going to integrate with. Okay, so they're not part of the team. No. Okay. So are they fully dedicated to supporting this team? Well, kind of, but you know, they've got other projects and things going on too. All right, cool. So let's dig a little bit deeper into this structure. Well, I guess the product owner is not really, they're kind of like, I guess, like an Uber product owner. So they take all the input from all of the outside lines of business and they figure it out. And then they give it to the 3 of us. Oh, so what are the 3 of you? Well, I guess we're kind of miniature product owners, I guess, if you will. So this person deals with one set of applications, this other person deals with another line of business, and the third person deals with this other thing. Okay, so you guys prioritize the work. Well, kind of. We kind of do that in conjunction with, these other 8 people. All right, so let's take a look a little bit deeper about how all of these other groups are connected with each other. Well, we're supporting 3 different lines of business. We've got another department where some work comes in some of the times, and then on that technical team down there at the bottom, department Y and Z, they kind of deal with other outside vendors. Oh, so there's other people, not just in this little green vendor box that we talked about previously. No, they've got these other applications and these other things happening. All right, cool. So we're starting to see how complex what originally started off as a fully dedicated team with a fully dedicated product owner is totally not the case. So the next thing that we started to look at was, well, what are the relationships between the people in these groups? So, who socializes with who? How are they all linked together as far as how they're getting work done? How do they get support from each other when they need to? Because they're in different buildings and sometimes different time zones. So the thicker black lines represent stronger relationships, and the thinner ones represent kind of looser, maybe more email-based relationships. So we can start to see that right in the middle, the 3 people in the blue group there, quite well connected to each other, sit together, work together all the time. They're in constant communication, either in person or virtually, and they have a very strong link to that first person who was considered to be the product owner. And that product owner has 3 strong relationships with the leads for each of the line of businesses. So it's already getting kind of complex. And then now we have to take a look at, well, originally we talked about how the team's fully dedicated to this program. Let's take a look at where the demand is coming from for Scrum Team 1 and Scrum Team 2. Where are they getting pulled from? Well, those pink arrows will represent where work is coming from. So we have work that's coming through the regular Scrum stuff, so things that are coming from the 3 of us. Sometimes people in the line of businesses, they go kind of directly around their main product owner. They come directly to us. Sometimes the program manager goes right to the Scrum team. Hey, can you do this favor for me? There's a support team, Department A in the top right, and depending on what the problem is, they might have to go to the team directly. And sometimes there's other project work, that the Scrum team 1 or 2 was part of another project team last year, and they're still kind of doing, various trickles of support and questions and knowledge transfer and stuff like this. So we can see very quickly how complex things get when we don't take a look at our programs or larger organizations, kind of like from an air traffic control perspective. That's really the metaphor that we used in this particular program, was who's going to play air traffic control. Because once we went through and kind of described where all the work came from, all the different groups that were involved, the teams that were involved, what constraints were on the teams as far as deadlines and production support and other projects. The team liftoff that I did over a span of 3 days to collect this from the teams all the way up to the executives, their #1 risk was complexity of the project. So I'd gone through about 5 or 6 different, why are you asking me to help you with Agile? What is your biggest problem to solve? And more or less, they unanimously agreed that complexity of the project was #1. So after mapping this stuff out and starting to talk about trade-offs, we can start to have a conversation about, is the way that we're structured and organized around the work, is it working for us? And how will we know? And what can we do to change it? And then perhaps most important is, it's pretty easy to say, well, yeah, we just need to dedicate the Scrum team and we need to stop all the other projects and do this. But in a system where you've got 500 people working in a program, it's not that simple. So here's some diagnostics and things that we can think about as far as what can we do to solve these problems. The one thing I did forget was me. Where do I fit in here? Well, I don't. I'm the outsider. So my relationships are the blue lines there with the 3 main people that I work with. So we have an idea of what the system looks like, how the teams are organized, where the work is coming from. Now, how do we coordinate stuff? And in this particular group, because there's 2 Scrum teams, all the Scrum ceremonies are duplicated except for retrospectives that are combined. And then, a whole whack of other project meetings. So particularly the 3 people in the middle in the blue bubble have to sit in on other meetings from other programs just to see if anything that other programs or teams are doing are going to affect the work that they're doing. So the 3 of them are in the middle are really stuck, more or less meetings all day, and then they go home and they do their day job at night. So another way to look at this is a picture that someone had done in a workshop that I did where they were exploring the same type of thing. So they looked at what is this change I want to make based on how we're organized today. The green underlines of the names are people who are supportive. The red underlines are the people that we think are, might fight against this change, and the people underlined in orange are sort of sitting on the fence. But using this sort of diagram was mapping out, if we were to try to make this change about how we're organized, where does the influence sit? And who do I need to talk to or convince that my way of doing things is the right way of doing things? So this picture won't make any sense to anybody who's looking at it. It was created about 4 or 5 years ago, and I actually talked to the guy about a month ago, put this picture up just for fun, and he remembers every single detail about this. So the idea of creating some type of map or mind map or influence diagram, the process of creating it is the important part, not the artifact itself. And one thing that's been, if you're following LinkedIn or Twitter, there's a lot of fights between camps about, well, you should be doing it this way, you're not doing Agile the right way, or you're doing Scrum the wrong way, or you're doing 16-minute stand-ups instead of 15-minute stand-ups. It's never going to be the same between teams in organizations. And the reason is that there's kind of 4 things that really matter. If we strip away all of the noise about Agile or any of the methods that sometimes we get a little too focused on, how do we group people in our organizations? There's pros and cons to all of these different ways of grouping people. Generally speaking, you can say feature teams are better than component teams. If we're grouped in functional silos, that creates a different set of problems if as opposed to being organized in a cross-functional way. But there's a whole bunch of different ways that we can group people together, and there's no right answer for it. It really depends on what the teams are producing, what markets they're in, the size of the organization, how conservative the organization is. It's going to be totally different. But we do have a few different ways that we can organize our people around the work, and then try to figure out what's the best way of grouping these people together. The most common in larger organizations is the matrix, or project teams, or program teams. Groups are also linked by work management tools. I'm sure everybody has seen all the jokes, hey, we installed Jira, we're now Agile, but it's not the tool's fault. There is Slack. There are so many different types of work management tools that allow teams to interact. So we've got those factors as well. What are the relationships and the links between those groups? There's usually some type of navigator or coordinator, whereas the 2 PMs are coordinating work between 2 sub-teams, or 2 Scrum Masters are coordinating that work, et cetera, et cetera. We might also be linked by customer experience. So in some organizations where I've worked, they have a cross-functional team from the business and IT and multiple departments within each of those 2 groups. But they're linked by the entire end-to-end customer experience, from onboarding all the way through to, reporting or selling or things like that. But without stepping back and taking a look at how are we running air traffic control about how our groups are linked together and how people are grouped in our programs, we're kind of just stuck with hitting each other over the head with the Agile stick, which doesn't help us move our organizations forward. So number 1, how do we group people? Number 2, how do we link those groups together? Number 3, how do we align people towards a common purpose? So the example that I showed previously is they're not aligned to a common purpose. The people who have a vested interest in getting the program done say, yes, we're fully dedicated, we're fully aligned towards getting the program done. And when you get down to the team level and they have support people nagging them every day for break fix stuff, what's more important? When we've got people at the team level who are being nagged by other projects they used to work with for knowledge transfer and help and things like that. No, we're not aligned around purpose, but we still need to ask some deeper questions. What would happen if we stopped some of that work? Or is the way that we're organized working for us? And how would we know? So the four things again, number one, how do we group our people together? How do we link those groups together? Do we have these groups aligned towards a common purpose or objective? And do we have feedback mechanisms in place to tell us whether or not this is working? Because every organization is going to be a little bit different. And we need to have a mix of metrics. We need to satisfy people who have a need for data and a need for certainty with some of the fuzzier things. 10 years ago, if you talked about happiness index, you'd get fired. But today it's everywhere. There's so many tools out there that are measuring happiness. I was at university last week talking to a person who they have a happiness app in their system tray. So there's a way that they kind of poll employees at regular intervals to find out. They just add in a little smiley face. I think there's 5 different icons. So they choose one of the 5 and they add a comment. How the data gets used, I don't know. I've seen some organizations where they have the happy or not buttons. So you just, at the elevator, whenever you're going by, you tap one of the 4 happiness buttons. But we need a mix of those things. We want to make sure people are happy, they're engaged. We want to make sure work's getting done, that our customers are happy. And the last one that I'm going to talk a little bit more about, which is what this presentation is biased towards, is network density and health. And this is something that's been used in organizational change for decades. And it's really a way for us to stand back from our organizations from an air traffic control level and take a look at how we are connecting people to get work done in our organizations. And the reason for doing that is, if you kind of stand back outside of the, is that Agile, is that Scrum, is that whatever, if you consider how many organizations exist on the planet today, there's got to be millions of teams there that are organizing in some type of process. Every company is using some type of hybrid, but often that hybrid gets labeled with it being a negative thing. We're Scrum, but we don't do stand-ups every day because we all sit together in the room and we communicate constantly. So yeah, you might not be doing Scrum, quote unquote, the right way, but you've adapted your process to suit what it is that you're doing. So I don't know, I've worked with easily hundreds of teams, and I can't think of one that has ever followed an Agile process exactly by the book. They kind of adapt things to suit their context. And sometimes they're adapting it because, on the outside, we'll think, well, they're just ignoring the problem. They don't really want to deal with this problem. And they've just changed the rules of Scrum to make it easier for them. Well, sometimes it's not the right time to solve problems outside of the team. And if we start to look at little small successes and things that the team can do to sort of improve at their own level, eventually somebody outside that team system is going to notice. And then you'll have a window of opportunity to make some other maybe more substantial organizational changes. The key thing is that coming in as an outsider, we often have a very limited amount of time to solve problems in organizations. So we might be there for a 3-month contract or a 6-month contract, but the people in the organization are in it for the long haul. So a lot of the times they can play the wait and see game, whereas for us as outsiders, it's a little harder to do that type of thing. But I learned the hard way in yelling and screaming matches was just Agile is kind of a means to an end for me. And how can we use these values and principles to guide our actions, but without using it as a stick to tell people, well, they're not doing it the right way because that's not the way that I would do it as the Agile coach. So to look at how we're organized, what problems are we having right now based on how we're organized? And in the case of the example that I showed earlier, program delivery isn't really one of the problems. It's more or less a focus factor. So the three people who are right in the middle who handle most of the work for the team, they are the most overworked. So the problem for them is, if I can't focus on program work, then the work that gets to the team is kind of done half-assed and not to a level of detail that helps the team actually build the stuff. So then they make some assumptions and we have to fix things later. But if we trace these things back down to a root cause, there's so many different inputs of where the work is coming in from. We can't focus on our primary objective, which is the program. So what problems exist? Who are these a problem for? And does anyone outside of the Agile coach care enough to make it better? And the reason I say that is often coming in as an outsider as an Agile coach, it's pretty easy to immediately see problems in an organization. The challenge becomes, it's not our organizations. So we need to meet these companies where they're at and help them make help them go one small step ahead, as opposed to what I normally see all over LinkedIn, which is, if you listen to LinkedIn, basically every company is stupid and every executive is an idiot. If you looked at all the stuff on LinkedIn about how everybody's doing Agile wrong, and here's the 5 mistakes you're making with transformation, and it's just so completely negative. But how are we going to help improve the lives of the people on the teams? Then let's reverse the paradigm. So what would happen if this problem didn't exist? How would we organize differently to solve these problems? And if we were to do that, what do we need to change for each of those problems, and who influences the change? I think we often lose sight that a lot of the way organizational change happens is in little pockets of moments based on how we influence people in our organizations. It's often said that we need to have top executive support in order to make Agile work. There's actually data from a company called KeyHubs, which is contrary, and it says as long as they're not opposed to it, whether or not they directly support it is largely irrelevant. That's not a rule, but there's a lot more power and influence at the bottom of the organization than there is at the top. And I've worked in enough organizations where everybody knows the dude named Biff who's been there for 10 years and knows everybody and knows how everything works. So Biff will say things like, oh yeah, I know Sarah, let's go take Sarah out for coffee and then she'll help us with this type of thing. So there's kind of the unofficial ways that change happens in our organizations. And again, as an outsider and as an Agile coach, sometimes we need to push a little bit more, whereas the people in the organization, they can sort of play the politics and navigate through those influence maps. And then number 6, most importantly, what trade-offs are we making? There is no ideal process. We're only making, hopefully, smaller, more manageable problems to deal with. So if we looked at that example, if we map this out in a mind map, who are these problems a problem for? Well, on the top right is support, and they're in red. So in red, those are the people that are metaphorically violently angry with how the work is getting done in this system, all the way to green, which is people who don't really care either way. So top right is support. Well, support, if anybody has ever done customer support before and you have no power or authority to fix anything, it's a really frustrating job. So response time is too long for us. And on the bottom left, the problems of not being able to get the work done is creating more pressure on the program managers, because often they are the link to the outside world. And they are the ones, that, along with PMs, that have to go back and report status and show risk logs and do all that type of stuff. So they get a lot of pressure on them, which influences their behavior in a certain way. And that pressure comes down to the team. And that's where you start to get things like program managers going around the process and directly to team members. So, but we need to realize that when we see people kind of behaving this way in our organizations, we immediately jump to those people. Well, it's that person, it's that PM that's rigid and doesn't want to do this Agile stuff. But when you think about it, they're not just supporting your team or your project or your program, they might be supporting 10 or 15. To which you may respond with, well, they shouldn't be doing that. Well, reality and perception of reality are kind of two different things. So they've got pressure coming from all over the place that's not visible to the people inside the work system. So we need to be a little more empathetic with what they're up against. And you could argue, I've got the part-time team members, full-time team members in green, that they quote unquote don't care. It's not that they don't care, it's that there's such a learned behavior of, well, we just get a list of stuff to do and we do it. We don't really care. We don't play the politics, or we don't worry about this, that, or the other. And then often the line of business heads and the execs, they're too far removed from the reality of what's going on. So they care when they get a report that has information they don't like. Or I've seen some cases where teams stop producing any type of status because we're agile now, we don't do that. And then by the time that floats its way up to the top of the hierarchy, that's where it becomes a problem. I worked in one organization, we were talking to an SVP around 8 pilot teams that we were trying, and he said, well, wait a minute, I thought only one team was allowed to be agile. And it sounds stupid to say that, but they're too far removed from what's going on with the teams. So we need to kind of explore, who are we creating a problem for, or what problem is lack of delivery causing in our entire ecosystem of work? Who cares the most about solving this problem? So with that same mind map, now add another dimension to it. What problem is it creating? Well, support, they're probably tired of getting yelled at. I did phone support for a year, and yeah, it sucks a lot of the times because you're the first person in front of the customer and you have zero power and authority to do anything. The 3 people who were in the middle of the diagram, they're just getting burned out. They're working long hours, they're working on too many different things and task switching too often, and just getting burned out. And it's funny, the one of the people on that team said, 3 or 4 years ago that it wasn't that big deal. I didn't mind doing all these hours, but I'm getting old now. And she's like late 20s, and I'm like, oh, come on. But still, when we get burned out, the older we get, the harder it is to work at this pace. Now we need to look at reversing the paradigm. So these are the things that we chatted about. Well, what would happen if support time was fast enough? What if the PM wasn't constantly hung out to dry? What if there was no incoming support? What if 3 people that were in front of the team were focused on only the program? So we can start to look at some scenarios and take those problems that we see and flip them around. What would happen if these problems didn't exist? So this is where we start to have those trade-off conversations. So what could we do? If we remember this diagram, we've talked about some trade-offs, we've reversed the paradigms. Let's look at some potential options. So we've got this kind of messy system diagram. What could we do? Well, the team only does program work. Well, that would be pretty costly, but it would be pretty valuable too. So the top right corner is high value, high cost. And cost is not just money you're spending. Cost is things like, we have to change a system of 500 people. That may never happen. That might take a year. But basically, there's a huge ripple effect. And that huge ripple effect means we need to maybe get 15 VPs aligned around organizing our people in a different way. But still, it's an option. We'd also have to talk about, well, what work do we stop? And whose decision is it? And what problem does that create? So another thing, like I said, stop other project work. Pretty easy to say. I remember hearing a really great story from Johanna Rothman when she was working in an organization. And it was basically, we have capacity for X. The incoming work is Y. Prioritize these, or I will choose for you. So sometimes the product owner or the program manager needs to take more of a firm stance and say, we can't keep working this way. Our team is getting burned out. Quality is bad. We're not focused. We only have capacity for these 3 things. Given you, Mr. or Mrs. Stakeholder, are paying for the work, you prioritize the 3 things. And if you don't, I'm going to have to choose for you and tell you my reasons why. So sometimes we need a very strong foreign element to shake up that status quo to get people to think differently. Another maybe softer option is, well, maybe we could just merge the technical teams with the Scrum teams. And then that would at least eliminate one handoff. And it would eliminate these 5 meetings, and it might smooth the work out a little bit. What's the impact to doing that? And then we can look at some maybe less disruptive options. So if we didn't change anything about how we're organized, what could we do to make it a little bit easier to get stuff done? The three people who were in the middle of the diagram that I talked to said, well, if we had one person every 2 weeks deal with all of the interruptions, so two of us could focus on just the program, that might make it easier. So if I could reduce my meetings by half every week, only focus on program work, that would make it easier for the delivery teams to get stuff done. Maybe some other project work might start piling up, or whoever is the person who's rotating in to handle all those interruptions. It might be hard if they haven't worked in that application before, but eventually they're going to learn. So we just want to talk about some different possible options that we could do. We're not committed to doing these yet. So if we looked at the option of, well, if we just had the three people rotate handling those interruptions. If we took our original diagram, hopefully this comes through okay in the web share. So most of the diagram is grayed out. How much of the system is affected by this change? Definitely the lines of business, because that's where all the work is coming from, and support for sure. So those would be the groups that we would have to go and talk to and influence into organizing how work comes in a different way. Benefits might be, maybe it is less disruptive. Given the conversation that I had with these folks, the relationships are quite strong. They get along quite well. So, you know, we could have a reasonably rational conversation around a different way to organize. So it's a pretty viable option for us to do this. It's also going to help us spread knowledge faster. So if we have, you know, if I'm the person who is dealing with all the interruptions for 2 weeks, it's going to force me to learn about these other systems. Plus, it's going to bring a fresh set of perspective on these problems or applications. So what if we just went, all right, let's just only focus the team on doing program work? Well, the entire system is affected, except of course for me. I can just sort of shake things up and go, have fun guys, and then my contract is done. But for them, yeah, it's like a huge grenade into their organization, potentially. They've got to go talk to the program manager, all the lines of business, all the technical teams, the vendor, the other teams, whoever is budgeting for these other projects, the support team. It's highly disruptive, extremely risky, and costly. The other side of the coin is maybe you need an intervention that's that strong to actually change things. So again, this is sort of a mapping technique you can do in an afternoon on a whiteboard, because usually the people, you know, the product owners or Scrum Masters or PMs, they usually know enough about the entire organizational system that's around the teams to be able to create this map. It's good to put it up on a wall and visualize it and bring other people through to validate it, because often once you see how your teams are structured in a visible way and where work is coming from, the problem or the source of the problem usually leaps right off of the wall. And then it's up to us as coaches or Scrum Masters to help these people find options they can live with. So, network density. Again, this is a very, very deep topic. So I'm going to just talk about the basics of something you can do to analyze what the network structure looks like in your organization. And this is everything from how influence works to where people are physically located. And then at the end of the presentation, there's some links with formulas for how you can calculate this stuff. The benefit is especially if you're in larger organizations and you're doing a network density diagram for, you know, 5 different programs, and looking at some of your measurements as far as, you know, your typical project management stuff, plus your more fuzzy metrics, you can start to see, once we start to calculate this network density, if we're kind of below this threshold, this number, we know that we're going to run into some type of problems. So when you're spinning up new programs and projects, you can use this data as an input to designing your work system. So first, let's get all the people out there and let's overlay where they're located. The orange stars, those are people who are in building A. Building B are the blue stars, and then there's one person who's working remotely. So we've got all the people who are working in this program, and we know where they are. So if I start with me in the middle there, who do I need to work with daily to be the most effective? There's a reciprocal way of doing this where, you know, the black line from me is pointing straight up to the person at the top of this diagram. If they don't say they need to work with me daily, then it's just a one-way link. It's not a two-way link. So there's much more detailed calculations you can do based on, you know, if I say I need to work with Biff, and Biff says, yeah, I need to work with Jason every day, that's a strong link in our network. It's a weaker link if I say, yeah, I need to work with Biff all the time because I just get along with Biff really well and he's in my carpool and we talk all the time and he answers a lot of questions because he's been there for 10 years and I'm fairly new. It's still a weaker link when it comes to actually doing the work because it's more of a social relationship as opposed to working together daily in a team. So that's one question to ask. Who do I need to work with daily to be the most effective? Now, who do I actually work with today? So it's these two other people. So then the obvious question becomes, the person there on the left-hand side where there's no red line going to, if I think I need to work with that person all the time and I'm not, why is that? Maybe they're assigned to a different project. Maybe, and I've seen this in organizations, you are not allowed to go talk to that person because they're too busy. But at least we've got some data where we can start to have that conversation. Next question to ask is, given how I want to change how we're organized to manage this work, who are the influencers? Who are the people that have either the power, and power is kind of a dirty word. Power is usually associated with hierarchy and command and control, but there is an immense amount of power in relationships. And a really, really quick story about Xerox Park Research. John Seely Brown, who was the director there, said one of the reasons why that Xerox couldn't capitalize on any of the things they invented in their innovation lab was he didn't work on establishing relationships with people who made all the money for the company. So they had the best and brightest, a cool space. They were separate off from everywhere else. They had all the cool technology to work on. They arguably made the laptop economically viable. They invented the mouse, but they didn't capitalize on any of these products because he didn't have good relationships with his peers, and his peers made all the money. So we kind of underestimate the word power with it just being about standing and hierarchy. It means many, many different things. So we start to map out, who do I need to connect to in order to influence the way that this change could work? And the last thing to ask is, let's look at all of the relationships in the network. And same thing, one-way or two-way relationships. So how are people sort of linked together with their relationships? So if you imagine me there in the middle and I want to organize people in a different way based on how the work is coming in, I have a relationship with the one person on the left-hand side, but I have no relationship with the person at the very bottom. So I know that that person is a strong influencer, but I'm not connected to them. So how do I reach that person? If you look at the white lines, the relationships in the network, I have no path to get to that person at all. There's potential that the person on the top right, where there's a red line connected, this is so much easier when I draw this on flip chart paper in front of a real audience. So hopefully you guys are following. So the person I work with on the right side of the diagram with the red line connecting them has a relationship with that other influencer. So maybe there's a path to influence that way as well. But without stepping back and considering what we do as coaches as sort of like being an air traffic controller and making sense of this organizational system, we're really kind of stuck with our assumptions about this person and why they're resisting change or why that manager doesn't want to be agile or whatever it is. So we need a little bit of both. So before we get into some questions, there's 3 different ways that we need to think about these types of changes. And like I mentioned earlier, where you go on LinkedIn or Twitter and you've got all the different camps fighting with each other, you've got the people that value the process and the data and say, well, you should do a value stream map and you should measure your flow and you should look at your statistical process control charts, and all of the good logical processy data analysis type of stuff. Professor Van Manen, who's the person I did my org change course through, said basically any idiot can draw an organizational structure on a napkin in a bar. There's no special skill needed to do that. Anybody can do it. It's all the other stuff around that becomes the hard problem. The relationships, the influence, the budgets, the location, the market we're in, our culture, all those types of things are all interconnected with each other. So if we only focus on the processy part, the agile part, the structural part, we're going to get a limited benefit in influencing change. We need to also think about the wallet. So budget, who's paying for the team? There's one organization I worked for where support just kept piling up and piling up and piling up because it was such a hard process to figure out who to bill to fix this problem. They just didn't bother to fix any of the problems. And it sounds kind of crazy, but that's often the way things work in large organizations. Budget is a very strong thing. And if you have a good relationship with somebody, yeah, you might be able to slide in some free work from time to time. But it's often other things we don't think about that might be getting in the way. And the last one, of course, heart, relationships, culture and feel. Where Ardita mentioned that we used to work together. I remember we were in this big town hall session where all the execs go on stage and talk about a bunch of stuff. And they usually say things like, oh, my door's always open, you know, come in and chat with me or whatever. So excuse me, one of the executives said that in her talk and said, yeah, if you know, I'd be happy to come and talk to your team and whatever. And Ardita goes, all right, cool. So as soon as she was done talking, Ardita goes right up to the stage and says, hey, you want to come to our team meeting next week? And then we built a relationship with that person. Excuse me, which was really cool. So we need kind of a mix of all these things, which means we need a diverse team. If we all think alike and we don't have positive friction, it's very difficult to have conversations around organizing people around the work differently. If we're always approaching it with data and data and data, and our main stakeholder is kind of a touchy-feely, fluffy person, all the data in the world isn't going to convince that person that we should organize differently. And the opposite is true as well. So we need to kind of consider these different dimensions when it comes to understanding how we're organized around the work. So I know we're getting close to the end. I'm just going to have a peek and see if there's any.
Yeah, we have about 12 minutes left.
Okay.
And a couple of questions already are coming, but
okay.
That's okay. That's okay.
Okay. So this will be up for download as well, references to some of these articles, and I'm going to show you just the example that we did in my course. So what we were, let me make sure this is coming through in the share, okay? Yep.
Yeah,
so
looks good.
we had to, okay, so we had to ask a bunch of simple questions to explore what network density is. So who is in your network? And keep it informal. The first question that we had to answer was, if you look back over the past 6 months, who are the people that you discuss matters that are important to you at work? So that sort of talks about social relationships. Second question, consider an important organizational initiative or change that you want to promote. Who are the people who would be influential in helping you making that real? Who do you need to talk with to get support for your change proposal? The third question, consider the people that you communicate with in order to get your work done. Who's been most important for getting your work done? You know, for this exercise, we did a maximum of 5 names, but if you're somebody, an employee in a big organization working in large programs, you might have 30 people in this little network diagram. And then socializing. That's important as well. So Professor Van Manen said, if you really want to know what makes an organization tick, start smoking. And he said, of course, I'm not advocating for starting smoking, But the idea is that you get the most diverse set of people who are out hanging out with smokers. I was in Finland a couple months ago, and I can't remember the name of the company, but one of the executives, her talk was around one of the things they did when they redesigned their office is they centralized the kitchen and the coffee machines. So it would increase the chance of collisions with people who normally didn't talk together all the time. So it's little tiny things like this about how we're influencing connections and relationships. And then what we had to do was take the people that we put in a list, and we had to create a network density chart. And basically, the more dense the network is, the better the communication is. So the larger your network is, the more you start to degrade the way communication happens. So that's where we get a lot of misaligned priorities, just because communication is different. If you want to simplify it, call it broken telephone. So we had to calculate our network density. So my Q2 here, support for the change, my network density was quite high, it was 2. Whereas the other ones, it was much, much lower. And then the EI index is basically external and internal people. So people who are, kind of tight networks inside the organization, and external people who are outside the organization that you have relationships with. But you calculate that index as well, and you can see if it's sort of what's called an entrepreneurial network or a tight-knit intra-company network. And then there was some information on calculating the formulas, and then we just had to draw this out. So you put your name in the middle, and then you start to draw lines around how people are connected with each other. And then you calculate these formulas. So if you were to map this thing out, which is basically what we did when I showed you this big ugly diagram at the beginning, was to map out where all the relationships existed. And then we tweaked it a bit. So we added in, where is work coming from and who decides how to prioritize it. Now we have an idea of what this airport looks like and how much traffic is flowing through this airport. And now we can start to look at system level tweaks to solve it. So the links in the bottom go into a substantially more data and calculations for how to do this. This type of information is typically used a lot in succession planning and for big reorganizations with organizational effectiveness people. But it's an old technique, so it's not anything that's new, but definitely things that are worthwhile to check out to help you make sense of your organization. So
wow. Should we take some questions, or?
I see a few in there.
Yeah, so probably two that we might need to talk about from Divjit. He says, well, initially when you were drawing all those circles and relationships, can these be simplified by running a scrum of scrums, or followed with sounds like the conflict is in prioritizing the various projects occurs because most of the time the organization priority and the strategy is not aligned or not visible to all the groups and teams. So basically we're out of sync. So
Yep.
Your thoughts around these two?
So the simplified one, the Scrum of Scrums, is precisely what these folks are doing. Now here's the challenge of the things that are missing. Let me use a different symbol here and a different color. Let's go with, no, that's not good. Let's go with this. So let's see if this actually works. So all of the people in this diagram have a hierarchy behind them. So there's a coordination point here between these two groups. There's a coordination point between the middle two groups here and both of the Scrum teams. There's a coordination point between the vendor, the technical team, this product team, this line of business, these support people, and sometimes other project work. So when we oversimplify and say, let's just do a Scrum of Scrums, the 3 people inside of here, they were attending about 7 Scrum of Scrums a day. So their whole day is just attending Scrum of Scrums idea. And when I came in, me as the outsider, and I sat in and watched some of these, and I went, okay, if we took a look at how you guys are refining the backlog from the program and the technical stuff from the people down here at the bottom, the three of you spending 4 hours a week is 12 hours that you guys could do in a 1 hour session. And here's why I think that. You talked about the exact same things, and then by the time we got to sprint planning, the team members who are not involved in those discussions had questions that we easily could have answered because we had the main product owner in the room. Now she assumes we're done, and now it's going to be harder for the three of you to go back and have her clarify these questions, which means the team isn't going to be able to finish those stories. So, and of course the response will be, well, then the team should sit in on those types of things. Well, where do you draw the line? Where do you draw the line of having 200 people in a scrum of scrums, or 200 people in a planning session or a refinement session? So there's kind of the law of diminishing returns. So yeah, try to simplify, but once you get this stuff up on a wall, there's one, we actually, I don't think I have a picture of it, but we did an inventory of all of the meetings and who needs to attend them in a big grid. And we looked at that and went, holy crap, no one's going to be able to get any work done. Like, everybody is in all of these different meetings. So how do we pare it down? How do we be more explicit about the decisions that we're making as a team? Scrum of Scrums breaks down at some point.
How about the alignment? Do you agree with organizational alignment missing there?
Oh, for sure it's missing. And the challenge becomes, so if we get only the team to work on the program, what about the other, $80 million worth of budget of projects and support and other things from the line of business? What do we do with those, and who decides how to stop them?
Bonuses.
Yeah, well, that's where we really, I think, fall down as an Agile community by just going back to the Agile stick and saying, well, that's not Agile. They should be fully dedicated. If you've ever been responsible for an $80 million budget for a department of 1,000 people, you know what that feels like. So if you're coming in from the outside going, but that's not Agile enough, you should just prioritize better. I mean, yeah, sure, that sounds great in theory, but who stands to lose? Which line of business, okay, we're going to stop all of your work. Line of business one. Okay, there's 80 people that work in that department. What are they going to do? You're stopping all their work to protect one Scrum team. Well, I guess we'll just fire 80 people. I mean, these are not simple problems by any stretch of the imagination. You sort of have to expose the problem to the system and then make a decision that we can be happy with the trade-offs. There's kind of no ideal state.
So maybe around those lines on aligning with an approach that comes from all the areas, and that we all are on board per se with this. Another question says, is there a particular pattern we'd expect to see the diagram change to in the desired state future? For example, less different pink or different line thickness, or what would be a desired patterns?
So the one technique is to have the people draw what the future state would look like, and then overlay this diagram on top of it, and then that will show you all the things that you need to change in order to make it happen. If these Scrum teams were to go by the book Scrum, and the little person icons in here, there's actually a lot more people. These just represent, groups of people in different departments. What do we do with the people that are left over that don't fit into the future state? So this is where, I had the head, heart, and wallet at the bottom. It's very easy theoretically to say, well, we'll just dedicate this team to it and we'll reassign all the other people to other projects. But you're impacting 1,000 people. It's harder to just use the stock answer of, yep, we'll just define the future state and work towards it. But the hard part is in all those little details, budget and who has to do what and who stands to lose and who stands to gain. It's hard.
And maybe the last question before I take for closing. How long does it typically take to create this diagram? And what have you ever been in a situation where this exploration and sharing this has caused more problems?
How long does it take? This particular program, we did three 2-hour session liftoffs. And then the actual diagram itself, 20-30 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Because for me as the outsider, it's very easy to ask these obvious questions and the really dumb questions, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm on a whiteboard asking them questions and just drawing lines, and then just pointed at the wall, and they went, oh. So this team, they actually decided, I know we're out of time, the middle chunk with the 3 people, they said, well, what if the 3 of us operated like a Scrum team? So we just took all of the work from everywhere into us, and then one person dealt with coordinating it with all of those outside groups, and the other 2 people just inwardly focused on the program. So that's what they're going to try next. So they're not disturbing everything around them, they're just doing what they can control for now.
Awesome. I think we're going to have to stop here. We're going just a little bit over time, but I'm going to take the presentation. Thank you, Jason. This was really helpful, and people are also saying how they enjoyed this, and they're probably going to follow up with you. The presentation is recorded and it will be posted. I think you mentioned you're going to post your slides for them, and we might connect that on the follow-up email. But thank you, this was valuable, and thanks for bringing all these experiences that you have had with your teams and sharing them with us. On behalf of the Toronto Agile community, I want to thank everyone that attended today. We have a big news. We have the Toronto Agile Open Space coming up on April 21st, and the registrations are now open. The space is limited, but the learning is unlimited. So you need to really make sure you are there, because it's one of the most useful and open conversations that you're going to have with our community. Lots to learn, lots to share. As always, please send us your feedback and any suggestions for future topics. And there are different ways to stay in touch with us and spread the word and join us in our future events. Thank you again, everyone, and thank you, Jason.
Thanks.